Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from New York Community Bank, M&T Bank, PBM, Customers Bank, Collins Building Services, AmTrust Title Insurance Company, Marks Paneth, Capital One Bank. Additional funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from Amerant Bank, Bank of America, Citizens Bank, Dime Community Bank, Douglaston Development Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handro Properties LLC Handler Real Estate Organization, Hodges Ward Elliott Inc., Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, John Catsimatidis Red Apple Group, Keysight Capital Partners, New Banks, Meridian Capital Group, Ocean First Bank, People's United Bank, RPW Group, TD Bank, and these friends. Somebody said to me that happy days are here again. This is like the roaring 20s. I don't know. We're in the summer of 2021. You know, the COVID, many people have been vaccinated, but unfortunately there's a variant, right, taking place today. So people aren't sure what's really going on. So today I've assembled a group of business and real estate leaders to provide their insight on how they see the market today. My guests include Norman Barbaro, who's the president of Norman Barbaro and Company, Greg Calico, who is the vice president of the Calico Group in Calico Management, and last but not least, my buddy Abe Schlissenfeld, who's the managing partner of the prominent accounting and auditing firm Marks Paneth LLP. So Norman, you know, you're in the trenches, we'll call it. Your firm just recently leased some property at City Lumber. You're active representing tenants. Is it a tenant market? Are we happy days again? How do you see the office market?
So first we work under two names, First New York Realty Brokers and Norman Barbaro. We are seeing a very, very busy market, but it is a bloodbath out there and it is really tough on the landlords. And we're seeing people leasing space. Some are going the short-term route and some are going the long-term route. We just finished a lease at 320 Park Avenue for 2 floors to renew a tenant. High numbers, 10-year lease. We just finished another lease with Vornado, 888 7th Avenue, high numbers, 10-year lease. And then on the other hand, we did another deal with Vornado at One Penn Plaza, a 2-year renewal for a law firm that's been there for 35 years. But as everyone, if your senior partners are getting older, sometimes they're looking at shorter term leases. But we are actually really very busy from Queens to Brooklyn. We finished a lease in Muss's building, moving a real estate firm to 15,000 feet on the top floor. You know, I can say the numbers are $40 a foot, but again, you don't get the same work letter as New York City, but I mean, it is a bargain compared to.
So what you're basically saying is that people are returning to the market. They're looking for space. There's an interest out there for space. There's no question. So I have a question for Greg. You know, Greg, you're involved with the residential market. How do you see the residential market in two ways, in light of the current market and in light of 2 years ago when the act was changed on the rent ramifications?
You know, as far as the market now, we're seeing more vacancies than we have in probably 30 plus years. More so in the outer boroughs, more Queens and Brooklyn than Manhattan. But I think right now you're seeing a very tenant-friendly market. I think now, you know, we're offering a concession, whereas, you know, like you said, a few years ago, we might not have been offering a concession, because I think what happened with COVID is a lot of people who lived, well, Manhattan and the outer boroughs, you know, moved elsewhere, whether it was with family or to a separate house, and they're slowly returning. The interest is definitely, you making it a tenant-friendly market where tenants now, with whether it's Street Easy, they have the ability to shop online and look at concessions. Whereas 20, 30 years ago, you didn't have an online mechanism to see, what deals were being offered. You would have to really be grassroots and go to various buildings and look at deals and analyze yourself. Now, technology, it's great, but it does create, I believe, a tenant-friendly market at this time. It enables these tenants to really shop and see which buildings are offering which concessions. As far as 2 years ago with the rent laws, some of the unintended consequences of that were, although the market, may have been a little bit stronger than it is now, you had a lot of landlords that were looking at leaving apartments vacant, because with the 2019 rent laws that were passed, you were no longer able to increase the legal rent. So if you had a 1-bedroom in Manhattan, hypothetically in a nice neighborhood or anywhere, with a legal rent of a suppressed value, call it, of a rent stabilized tenant that was living there $1,400 a month. What used to happen before the 2019 rent laws is that tenant would leave, you'd get a 20% vacancy bump. You would be able to renovate the apartment, and through the dollars renovated in the apartment, you'd be able to increase the legal rent that you would charge for the next tenant. The housing law, the legislation of 2019 took that away, or it allowed it up to only $15,000, and increasing the legal rent a limited amount. But it was short-sighted because it didn't distinguish a studio versus a 2 or a 3-bedroom. Now, obviously, a 3-bedroom is going to have more bathrooms, more appliances, more needed to be renovated. So what landlords were doing was, if you had an apartment with a legal rent of $1,500 a month, and you could only increase it, say, without the vacancy increase, or being able to increase your legal rent to $1,600 a month, landlords are going to opt to leave that apartment vacant as opposed to leasing it at a very sub-market rate, and give someone almost like a life estate. So you're going to artificially suppress your rent, have someone in there, and you have a lot of landlords in the market 2 years ago that were just keeping apartments empty because they didn't want to have a very suppressed rent for an apartment, and they were just hoping that the legislation would change.
The rent regulations in, June of 19, if I recall correctly, that changed the landscape of the residential market in New York City. It was really very hard for people that had recently bought buildings to be able to get the returns that they were expecting when they bought it. Then COVID hit, and it made a bad situation worse. And a lot of these landlords that had people running out of New York. And it just became harder and harder to increase the rents. And a lot of times it was better for them to leave it empty. So that being said, I have heard that, over the last 2 months, and, who knows what's going to be with the Delta variant, but over the last 2 months, there's been a significant uptick of a lot of our clients leasing, really becoming very active, people coming back to New York. And, many of us see it every day, the influx of people on the streets in New York. So the rental market is definitely picking up, especially considering to where it was a year and a half ago. So as far as the general business market, and first of all, I'll just remind everyone that the hospitality and the tourism hasn't restarted. So till that restarts, it's really going to be hard to get a lot of those, I'll call it ancillary industries up and running. The hotels, theater, hopefully opening up shortly after Labor Day will, really give a jump start to a lot of that. In the commercial space, I've been joking that a year ago everyone thought Manhattan was going to be a big playground, and you fast forward to now, where as we head towards Labor Day of 2021. It's quite evident that Manhattan is, I think you start off the show today, the roaring 20s, and it really is. It's Manhattan is abuzz, and anyone that takes the time to walk through the streets of Manhattan sees that it's a different Manhattan of a year ago. It's quite vibrant. And, leasing, there was a lot of talk about subleasing, and a lot of people got very good deals in the subleasing. But as we move forward and there are new industries moving into New York City, when people build out spaces now, the way the landlords are going to be attracting tenants are with amenities. So while they may be people might not be coming to the office as many days as in the past, and maybe a little less need for sitting space. There's still need for for other footprint areas. So over time, the leasing footprint should not be significantly affected by whatever the new normal might be.
Each and every day you hear another CEO of a major banking organization saying that if you want to get paid New York salaries, you got to work like New York people. What about the return to work? Any thoughts about that, Norman?
I've seen a lot of, like one law firm at 2 Penn Plaza, the managing partner went from Florida to the Berkshires. And we renewed their lease at about 16,000 square feet. They gave back 2,500. Another law firm on 3rd Avenue at 805 that I'm negotiating is giving back 30% of their space. The managing partner is now working out of Florida. So I'm finding a lot of people are working very unique situations. A lot of them are working remotely and have cut back on their space. And then I'm seeing, we're finishing a lease on 60th Street where the tenant is doubling their space because they're therapists and they're going from 12 to 24,000.
There's a big need for the therapy.
Exactly, right. So it is really strange, but my prediction was always that I never saw vacancies in commercial over 8%. In my 40 years in this business, never saw something more than like 8% vacancy. And now I'm seeing on direct space, we're getting close to, we're 18 something, and I think we're getting to 20% by the end of the year. I'm hoping that's the end, but the concessions, the landlords are really bleeding very badly. The commercial landlords are really getting hurt.
Greg, you and the family have gone out of state. Are you continuing to be interested in developing and owning properties out of New York?
The answer is yes, absolutely we are. We've even ramped up our efforts to, invest and develop out of state, during COVID. As we know, and again, unfortunately, it turned into a political issue, but you did see a natural migration to the southern states during, the shutdowns and, when the pandemic, really started to unfortunately wreak havoc. You saw a decline in population in places like Chicago, New York, California. You saw an influx of people moving to places like Texas, North Carolina, Alabama, Florida. And I think it's a combination of the restrictions, which, again, obviously now have been eliminated, but the benefit that we see to being in the Southeast is it's, less restrictive. There's very little to no regulation as far as what you can charge on rents. There's less bureaucracy in dealing with the government agencies down there. I think there's just like a misconception of, landlords in New York City being these evil, greedy, people. And I don't really think that's the case. I think that, there may be some bad apples, but there are bad apples in every industry. I do believe that, with the housing rent laws of 2019, the ability to increase rents 1.5% to 2% a year maybe is not sustainable when insurance is going up 10% a year, water and sewer costs, property taxes. You're limiting the increase in rent, but year over year at this point, landlords are making less money. And I think that, you're seeing it now as opposed to trying to fight where it's an uphill battle because there are more tenants than landlords that vote in the city. We are looking to the South, and we do enjoy working down there with less regulation, less bureaucracy, and a more welcoming environment. We love New York City. We're finishing up a project here now, but it's kind of difficult, when you seem to be having a tough time with the legislators. So we prefer to just sit at a different lunch table and try to make our money elsewhere. And, we do enjoy the travel and, do believe that cap rates in the Southeast are going to continue to stay compressed. I mean, we're selling properties in the Southeast now, sub-4 cap rates.
Okay. Norman, you're involved with quick service food business. Let's talk about how you see the quick service food business today.
The fast food restaurants are doing fantastic. The problem is the employees. When the government has given the bonus unemployment money, it has really made it extremely high to get employees, to retain employees, to the point where I saw someone sent me where there was a sign on the drive-through window said, "We quit, sorry," you know. And the problem is that you know, when you're giving throwing so much money to people, that there's no incentive to work. You know, they're getting a bonus of $300 on top of their unemployment check. So, but the stores are actually doing the best they've ever done, as the best they've done.
Now you own some what? Burger King, some Wendy's.
Wendy's 200. I'm involved with about 250.
With regard to retail, Greg, do you believe it's also a opportunity time for retailers, you know, to negotiate percentage rents and so on?
I'm less worried about the retailers than the quick service and the restaurant places. You know, them, you know, last year, again, depending where you are. But a lot of people were trying to work that out, and the landlords that did it and work with them are coming out on the back end now. You know, in a good relationship with their tenants. Retail has its ebbs and flows. You know, 10 years ago, everyone thought with Amazon and the web coming along that, you know, there would be no more need for malls anymore. And I was just in a mall the other day, and it was a Sunday in New Jersey, and all the stores were closed, but there were thousands of people in the mall because there's so much to do in the malls nowadays other than just shopping for clothing. So, you know, retail has its work cut out for them. And, you know, landlords should be working with them and are working with them. But to the extent that they're somewhat creative, there's a lot of upside in the retail sector.
With regard to the Biden tax bill, how do you see its effect on the real estate market, Abe?
Wow. You know, there's so much uncertainty there now. And it's so hard, in all honesty, to fully plan around it. But, you know, obviously with what we've been hearing coming out of Washington is very unfavorable to the real estate industry. And arguably the worst thing coming out is the removal of step up, you know, upon death. You know, the 1031s is obviously a big issue. That being said, one thing I found is the private sector has a lot more brain power than DC does. And with you know, a lot of laws that get passed, there are, you know, a lot of creative ways that are figured out to circumvent it. But the removal of step up at death is going to be a hard one. That being said, there's already people working out ways around it. Obviously, the increase in tax rate is not going to be good. You know, in general, for the real estate industry, whether it be at the federal level, and in all honesty, it's what's partially hurting New York also, is, you know, when you start taxing everyone, that's not necessarily the best way to stimulate you know, transactions and keep the industry moving ahead.
Another phenomenon that took place prior to COVID was the co-working and co-living. Norman, how do you see the co-working, the WeWorks, the Regus, and so on? Greg, have you thought of ever doing co-living and so on?
Well, the co-living I can't address, but co-working has really dropped down to 20% need. I mean, I don't see, maybe it's 30% or even, but it's a bloodbath out there. I mean, the WeWork debacle where they took 10 floors in the building up the block from me. I don't want to say, I just see all these spaces going back to the landlord. I don't see them coming back to refill all these floors. And I just know a number of landlords that are sitting with so many empty floors that are co-working. So I just think it's a disaster. But landlords really need to rent their spaces. They have high tax bills. The taxes have gone up tremendous on the buildings. Their operating costs, the construction costs to build out the spaces. So, I mean, they got to they're trying to look at every way how to try to not have to rebuild these spaces. So the problem is that there are a lot of these spaces that are out there available.
Question, Abe, a number of accounting and professional firms have used hoteling. Have you and your firm thought of hoteling, or, also maybe co-working in certain other facilities, around the country, as opposed to your New York?
So first of all, as far as hoteling, So our office, although we've been open for over a year now, we're actually having everyone come back starting August 9th. I guess by the time this is showing us to be after that already. And we are starting hoteling in one of our suburban offices in conjunction with our return to the office. And we are rolling out hoteling to all of our offices.
Would you explain what hoteling is to the audience?
We can probably do a whole separate show on it, but in a very short synopsis, it is basically where the staff aren't assigned their own seats. And there's some complicated software, there's technology involved, and you can reserve seats, X amount of time ahead. And basically, and through the technology, we know who's sitting where. It allows you to you can go to our New York City office one day, our Woodbury office another day, and to our New Jersey office another day. So it really is allowing a lot more flexibility, allows us to maximize the footprint that we have in all of our existing offices. And in addition to that, it will allow us over time, as we hopefully do more acquisitions, to take on less footprint and less real estate. As far as using it more around the country, I'll say, we actually have a lot of staff that have gone fully remote during COVID, after COVID. I have one staff member that lives in Hawaii now, and she's a member of the firm, works for us. So a lot of this, whether it be hoteling, co-working, or some of the remote working, really allows us to be a lot more flexible with our employees, because talent is what it's all about now.
Greg, co-living?
Yeah, I mean, as far as co-living, I know we were going to do a deal with one of the larger co-living groups, and it didn't come to pass. But I mean, as far as co-living, I feel like now with COVID, there's kind of been it's almost in the past to try to live with, dormitory style living. And I say that because, again, from our perspective, the developments that we've been working on, we've been seeing the studios rent the fastest. So what that means to me is people are, like their own space at this point. I think, the co-living, again, people may be a little bit hesitant at this time to live with people that they don't know, especially with the increase of the Delta variant. If you're living with 3 or 4 people, you don't know where they're going, what they're doing, what restaurants, bars. So I think there is a little bit of hesitancy. And I think until we see, numbers, with coronavirus and the Delta variant, subside substantially, I think people are going to really want their own space. And, the shares in the larger units now, to me, I think that may be more occupied by families. So I don't know what's going to be for the future of co-living. I think eventually, it can be successful, but at this time, I think that, based on what we've been seeing in the apartments that we've been leasing, because of COVID, people really want their own space. They don't necessarily want to share a bathroom or, common area. They want even if it's smaller, they want their own space.
So here's a quick question for Norman and Abe. We only have a couple minutes left. Where are the opportunities today? How can you grow your business today? Where are those opportunities, Abe?
New York City is alive and strong, and again, politics, hopefully we'll clean up some of the issues in New York. But having a presence in both suburban areas as well as New York City really gives the right footprint to be able to maximize on a lot of businesses that are doing extremely well and growing in both New York City with suburban presences. And I think that's really the model that a lot of companies will be doing going forward, and something that we're trying to focus on, where it's not just New York City or just the suburbs, it's a combination of both.
I think it's a good point. Norman?
We brought in 14 interns for the summer, which we were on the edge of doing or not doing, but we brought in 14. And actually, one of them has said, I want to continue on. I think this is a great opportunity for a lot of people that want to work. The question is, you have to get people that want to come to an office, want to work, want to pick up the phone, want to make calls, and have drive, tenacity, all the things that you need in my industry to be a salesperson. I've come in almost all through the COVID unless we've had a really a big lockdown, and we're training, and we're still so I think you have to have the company drive also from the other side, the company drive as well as the employee drive. But I think there are lots of opportunities for people out there. The market is really very busy out there, even though the concessions are bigger and the landlords are hurting. There's opportunities. So New York is coming back. It's going to take time, but there's and concessions are huge, but I think there's a lot of opportunity for work here. And Queens and Brooklyn, just so you know, we're doing a lot of work in Brooklyn. It is a lot of people live there and they want to work there.
Like Norman and Abe said, New York City is definitely coming back. And I think really to, grow your business during the pandemic, I'm a believer at this point, in order to grow outward, you have to grow inward. Like Norman said, we don't know what's going to be with the Delta variant. We don't know what's going to be with future variants, shutdowns, mask mandates. I think culture and loyalty in with a company right now is incredibly important. I think that, throughout, COVID, post-COVID, to grow your business, I think you really need a good internal structure. Our company had, throughout COVID or even post-COVID, saw a lot of turnover with our staff. Then, I would have to look inward and see if there was something that we were, doing wrong. But as there's a lot of opportunity for good work. I think in order to grow your business, you have to make sure that you have a culture and loyalty that is very catering and amenable to the employees, whether that means some work from home, whatever it may be. You want to show the employees that during difficult times you take care of them.
As all of you said, Mike, you may not be in the studio, but I do have the crystal apple.
Yes.
Okay. And the crystal apple, I just shined it a little bit, with the rag, and it looks to me that it's getting brighter. And I hope that, the future is bright. Hope to have you back on the new season. I'd like to thank Norman, Abe, and Greg, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.